Hi everybody, it's Nathan Cool with Swell Watch on surfingmagazine.com. Time for another El Nino video. It's September 19th, 2015. This last week I gave a talk up in Ventura and discussed a lot of things I wanted to share with you today. Some of it was about the economics of El Nino, and I'll be doing more on that in upcoming videos as well. But I also wanted to discuss where we are right now, how this actually compares to things that are going on as far as perception-wise. A lot of things that we're seeing right now and hearing right now is that anecdotal in comparison to 1997, 1998. What do the impacts of that really mean? And as we talk about the Godzilla El Nino, or the very strong El Nino as more, it should actually be more appropriately named, does that really mean that we're in for a harsher winter? Does it mean that we're in for bigger surf? Does it mean we're in for bigger rain? And I wanted to discuss something that's very important when it comes to these perceptions, and it's a matter of strength versus length. So I got a lot of information to cover, and I'm going to tell you about some other stuff that'll be coming up shortly in some other videos and some other data that I'm working on. So let's take a look. This is what's going on right now. So one of the first things I discussed this last week and I wanted to show was some of the Google trends, and this happens to affect also the markets. And we can see that there's been somewhat of a trend here recently in 2015, where we had a lot of interest in the drought. A lot of people were interested in that. And then recently, obviously, there's been a lot more El Nino. And that's been because of a lot of the media attention that's been brought to it. Doesn't mean that necessarily we would have this amazing El Nino, the strong El Nino, although that is going to be the case, but it is a perception. But things have changed. And so one of the things that has changed has been how the Don has affected everything. So things have changed in the media. What's in vogue right now was not what's in vogue maybe a couple months ago. So a lot of attention has been brought away from actually what's happening. It's kind of a shame that some of this has taken the spotlight in the media, and I would have rather had some of the El Nino hyped up, because there's a lot of things that actually need to be realized. One of those things is how we talk about the economies of El Nino. And when you put that in perspective to Donald Trump's net worth, which is about $4 billion if you go by Forbes, that was El Nino. The losses alone were greater than that in 1997, 1998 from typical stuff. Property, agriculture, tourism, we know that. One of the things you might not have realized, and these are numbers, by the way, that were put together by the American Meteorological Society, by climatologists at the University of Washington after the 97-98 event, there were actually a lot of gains. In fact, $19 billion in gains, and a lot of that is because if you've watched some of my prior El Nino videos, you realize there's really not an effect on Atlantic hurricanes. It can have an effect on Pacific hurricanes, but not on the Atlantic. Also, we're talking about warmer temperatures, and I'm going to get to that near the end too of what we can actually expect over this winter, but in 1997-98 there were lower winter heating costs and a whole different variety of other economic indicators. There was no paradox of thrift. There was a lot more spending that actually happened, surprisingly, even though we had an El Nino. So what I wanted to really concentrate on today was this idea of we're up against the strong El Nino. We know that, but it's not necessarily strength as it is length. So taking a quick look, and this will then set the stage for the rest of what I actually want to start discussing and comparing to when we take a look at all the factors involved and what we can expect this winter compared to others. So real quickly, the La Nina versus the El Nino. Normally, or what would be during a La Nina pattern, which would just be more intensified, high pressure dominates the Gulf region. We have colder water that would be in the equatorial Pacific in the east, and that allows the normal weather pattern of this high pressure to dominate. Now, if we have a La Nina, which we did have, that strengthens, and the jet stream takes the storms up above us, or, and no matter how you look at it, somehow they get diverted away from California. More often than not, and we saw this for many years when it came to large swell-making systems coming out of the western Pacific for California. They'd come across the jet stream and they'd get bumped up way high up into the Aleutians and into Alaska, and then we just wouldn't see anything out of them when it came to surf or rain. Now, one of the things that did do, though, is that it also allowed more sunlight to hit this area. A lot of warmth did occur from that, and we've seen that in other videos that I've posted, and you've probably seen that in other diagrams as well, where now we have the blob, and that's also adding to what we have now. It's an interesting way on how Earth has equilibrium. El Nino, we've got those warmer waters that would be over here, and we've seen many diagrams on that, and of course we have low pressure, and that spins counterclockwise. So as those storms come out of the western Pacific, they're driven into a lower latitude, and that then brings the chance of rain that would normally be up in the Pacific Northwest. It brings that down to Southern California, and this then becomes a point of diminishing return. If you have a strong El Nino, that's great. You can lower the jet stream. That's fantastic if we're going to get rain for Southern California. But only at some point will that actually have more of a difference. And that's where you get a certain strong El Nino. And this is one of the things that I'm looking at correlates right now to actually put together more information for you and how that could work for long-term effects. One of the things we can see right now is that when we look at the history of strength versus length, very popular chart. I've shown this, many others have as well. This is from the CPC, from NOAA. And we can see the El Nino years here up at the top and how strong they were, and the La Nina years down here at the bottom. And 1997, very peaky event, we've talked about that before, and also 1982. But look at also when we've gotten longer periods of El Nino that weren't very strong, also in through here. And we get a better picture of that when we take a look at how the PDO is affecting this as well. So the PDO, the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, this is something that's more of El Nino's big brother. It's more of a larger scale Pacific Decadal Oscillation. And when you compare that, you can see here some interesting effects. When we had La Nina, sure enough, we were in a very negative PDO state. And to get a better idea, let's overlay that. So now we've got El Nino versus PDO. And if you could take a look at this overlay, we can see starting at 1982, sure, we had that strong El Nino, but we had a continued strengthening of the PDO. So we had a fairly strong PDO signal, even though we were in La Nina, and it allowed for frequent El Ninos to continue. And the same thing goes for this period, which was in the early 90s. In fact, as we went through the 90s and we led up to the major 1997-98 event, we weren't really in a drought. We had a lot of rainfall still coming during this time. We were in a very positive PDO, and we can see that when we start overlaying then the amount of rainfall. So this is a chart also, and I showed this in my last video, of the amount of rainfall that was measured at USC campus over the years. 1997, very peaky, a lot of rain happened in the 97-98 timeframe. We can see the same thing over the 82-83 El Nino here, and you can see that it does happen when we have more long-standing El Ninos, ones that last a lot longer or at least don't go into La Nina. Happened again too in around the period of 2000 to around 2006. Had a lot of small El Ninos, but the big idea here, the main point, is that we had continued rain for many winters. What happened though is once the PDO went negative, we started getting into those persistent La Ninas, the continued blocking high pressure in the Gulf of Alaska. Very little in the way of surf coming to Southern California, or California in particular, and also a lot less rainfall. This led to our drought. So when we look though now what's happening, we do have the El Nino building. We also have this positive PDO cycle that's also building right now. And if this PDO can hold together, that could mean that we win length over strength just out of this El Nino. But talking about strength, this is an update of the chart from the last video that I posted, and we can see the different El Nino years in the 3-month mean, and it's one of the best gauges for how strong an El Nino will be. It's the same data that's used when we compile all this information together. So taking a look at 2015, which is this purple line here, and 1997 on the blue line, last time we talked, there was actually a meeting of the minds in a way, right around the May, June, July 3-month mean. But the 1997 actually was outpacing it. Once again, that was a very peaky event. So hopefully 2015, while it's still on the rise, doing so at a slower rate, could this possibly be a signal that we are going to have a longer lasting El Nino, more rain for more years to come? Hopefully so. And of course, the PDO is starting to align with that. We take a look at the PDO strength of just this year compared to other El Nino years. For the most part, PDO was, whatever. We do know that the PDO did go high, though, for the most part, during El Nino years. That's one of the biggest correlations to PDO and El Nino. During the 1997 event, during that year, the PDO all of a sudden increased and then went down. In fact, when we go back and take a look at one of those other slides where we have those overlays and we're showing how that actually compared, we can see that after the 97-98 event, we went down into a time of naught. We went into a La Nina immediately afterwards. El Nino came, El Nino went, and for a little while we had much lower rainfall until we could get back into an El Nino pattern. But taking a look back at the PDO and where it stands right now, we're still not doing too bad. 2015, we're still at a fairly good height. It does dip, it does go down, but nothing has completely collapsed. So that's good on keeping the El Nino strengthened from backing it up by the PDO. So one of the common things that are watched out there are westerly winds, westerly wind bursts, and also Kelvin waves. What this does, I've drawn some lines here to kind of give a correlation here. On the y-axis, we have time. So in this chart, it started October 2014, and here we are September 2015. These across the x-axis are the degrees of longitude. And then we can see the amount of sea surface temperatures here, and on this chart, these are the wind anomalies. The winds that would blow the warm water back over to the eastern Pacific and into our El Nino region. We can see that every time there was winds, there was warming. When there was a wind anomaly, there was warming. And what happened, what was interesting, is during the summer we had a lot of wind, a lot of anomalous wind bursts that were happening, and that led to a very large Kelvin wave, so a very large amount of warming that was passed in. Last time we talked, I talked about this gap. All of a sudden we have this cold water. Some people were worried we might go to Modoki. I was watching that as well. Well, that gap is starting to close, so hopefully that will continue. Either way, the El Nino zone that we're really concerned about really does fall in here. This is where we're talking about El Nino 3.4, and this is all that we need right here to have a very good El Nino, and that looks to be on track. So something though that has happened recently, here's those westerly winds that occurred during summer. So a lot of grouping of very strong westerly winds blowing from west to east. And that helps strengthen El Nino. But recently we have had anomalies, but they haven't been that out of the ordinary. So this is good news in a way in that maybe we're not going into a peaky event. There's nothing to show that we're diminishing from El Nino. In fact, the anomalies continue. They just weren't as strong as what they were during the summer. So this would continue pushing warm water our way, and in comparison, when we take a look at 97, 98, here's the sea surface temperature anomalies. And you can see over time, they really picked up after summer. There was a lot going on in summer, but they really started to pick up in October. And those wind anomalies too, the same thing. It was near the end of summer and into October where those came. So we already had a lot of winds that occurred before that when we take a look at this year's El Nino. We had wind bursts and Kelvin waves that were happening way back in March. And then they happened again in the beginning of May, and then they also happened almost all during the summer. So actually those winds look better than when we took a look at the 97 event. And of course that could mean a long-lasting El Nino, but we definitely know we're in a very strong El Nino. Comparison, this is 1997, this is September 19th, 1997. This is exactly, what would it be, 18 years ago today. And we can see that we're absent of the blob, of course, and that's something else that's affecting us now. But more importantly, the El Nino region that really affects our winter storms, it has the influence on that jet stream and keeping the jet stream at the lower latitude to bring Southern California a lot more surf and rain. So that was a very solid red. We can see hot temperatures, relatively speaking, with a very long tail going out of it. And taking a look at where we are today, this is actually measurements from 2 days ago. Still have a bit of a gap, a little bit spotty, but this is still a very strong El Nino. We also have this warm water that's been sitting off of California. We know that. We're getting hammerheads up in Southern California, and bizarre fish are showing up also in the Gulf of Alaska from the blob. And when we talk about some of the recent rains that we're getting in September, one was from Hurricane Linda, not necessarily El Nino, but also from these warm waters. So interestingly, these warm waters being warmed up from an extended period of La Nina, it's amazing that both of these now are coming together. We've got warm water from that extended period of sunshine hitting the Gulf of Alaska, El Nino coming into play. It's almost like the perfect storm for hopefully an extended period of El Nino. So where are we with the projections on the models? So anything here above a 2 is amazingly strong. That's a strong El Nino. Once again, there could be a point of diminishing return once you go so high as far as what that means for the short term. So this is the 3-month mean down here. This measurement was taken in August as observations. We're already in the most of the El Nino zones at about 2 degrees Celsius anomalous. And so as we start going, we already know that we're at a very strong El Nino state, and it could even go stronger. Most of the models show that as we go into winter, we're in the October, November, December, January, and even December, January, February, it stays strong. And then as we get into the spring and summer, it dies off, but hardly nothing is showing that we would go into a La Nina again. In fact, we may go neutral. So when we take a look at that over the longer term, everybody was wondering, where did El Nino go last year? This was 2014, and everybody during the beginning of the year was talking about, oh, we're going to get a strong El Nino. Well, we did get an El Nino. It was just about 1 degree Celsius anomalous compared to the El Nino that we're experiencing now. So we are right about here, right now, with the 2015 El Nino. We're in this range. right about here. And this is where it's expected to go. So we are looking at a very strong El Nino compared to 2014, possibly stronger than what we were in 1997, but hopefully it'll be a longer lasting event. So what does this mean actually for what we can expect? So this is the latest 3-month outlook precipitation probability by NOAA for the January, February, March timeframe when Southern California normally gets rain. It's looking at actually getting more. So this green area here is all different degrees, different gradients of how much rainfall to expect above normal. So the very dark green area here that goes from about Los Angeles up past Point Conception, even up to even San Francisco almost, where we're taking a look at an 80% chance above normal rainfall for the potential possibility. And then even extending far up into almost Oregon, we're expecting that. But the Pacific Northwest, not so much so. In fact, a lot of precipitation also going down into some of the more northern states. As far as temperature goes, we're taking a look at above normal temperatures from this El Nino, and those will extend way up into Washington where they are in a drought. They do need rain. One of the things to consider is that we need to have snowfall. Snowfall is what really gets California out of the drought. We need to have that snowpack, and that's where most of the water sources come from. Well, we can get a lot of rain, and we're taking a look at that even up in the Northern California area, but it may not be enough because we do require the snowpack, and the snowpack requires colder temperatures than what we're seeing here. So if you're planning a trip also this winter and you're thinking about skiing up in Mammoth or some of the California ski resorts, you may be somewhat disappointed. It also may have more rain. The temperatures may be above normal, but if you take a look at areas like Colorado where it wouldn't be quite as affected as far as temperatures, but it could still have a good amount of precipitation, that may be one of your best bets for looking at something to come for this winter. So really quickly, that's where we are. That's everything in brief. I'd encourage you to take a look at some of my past El Nino videos. If some of this maybe have seemed a little bit fuzzy, not sure about some of the other things I was talking about. You can also subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's free, doesn't cost you anything, and you'll stay updated when I post new videos like this. A couple of things that I'm working on right now is taking a look at also the economics of this impact and what it means over the winter and the spring and possibly even into the rest of 2016. Are we up against really a point of diminishing return with the El Nino and the strengthening of it? And if it hits the financial markets, are we really up against something of a paradox of thrift? Or are we up against something like a tragedy of the commons? Are we up against any other economic factor that is just merely based on perception, or is there real economic impacts that we can be taking a look at? Also, you can follow me regularly on surfingmagazine.com. I do the forecast for Southern California. That's over at forecast.surfingmagazine.com. And if you'd like, you can also follow me on Facebook at facebook.com/NathanToddCool. Well, that's all that I've got for now. So until next time, take care, be safe, and smile in the lineup.